Thanks a lot, Dave. Great name. And thanks for the kickoff. I appreciate it. I'm David Antonelli. I'm the Director of National Sales at Sling. As David just mentioned, I'm really thrilled to be here today and kick off a really incredible lineup on the agenda of the future of TV. For this panel specifically, we're focusing on automating and adapting the TV buy through digital. We're so thankful. We had a great prep call with the crew here. We have an amazing group of panelists joining us today. And really with these true experts from both the client as well as the platform side of the business, we're going to get to dig into a lot of great topics, including how buyers are shifting to connected TV, what they still need to have optimal automation, and also finally, think about what does the future have in store, because there's a lot of exciting change out there right now that we're experiencing and part of. And these are all really near and dear topics to us at Dish Media, because we were really the founders of live OTT and dynamic ad insertion with Sling, and also as leaders in offering this live inventory programmatically for years now. We deliver over 1 billion impressions per month to over 200 networks. So for us, it's really important to have this talk and to get this feedback from the marketplace because things are changing more quickly than ever, and we really need to make sure that we get this great feedback from our clients. And our panelists are really on the forefront of all this change and looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Now that I've given you a good sense of where we're headed today, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Andrew Tint. He heads up our programmatic business at Sling, and then we'll welcome all of our panel members. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Excited as Dave is for this conversation today. As you mentioned, my name is Andrew Tint. I lead up a programmatic partnerships team over at Sling TV. I'm going to go around and let each panelist introduce themselves, starting with Rachel.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Pierce. I am Director of Global Programmatic and Data Management at IHG Hotels and Resorts. So for those of you who aren't familiar with IHG Hotels and Resorts, we are a global hotel company, represent 16 brands, about 6,000 destinations across the globe, most notable Holiday Inn, Intercontinental, Kimpton. My responsibilities at IHG is I lead the programmatic team, which encompasses data management, programmatic execution, as well as paid media planning. So thanks for having me.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Nicole.
Hey everyone, I'm Nicole Kane. I lead the precision and digital marketing team at Molson Coors. Most of you probably know some of our big brands such as Miller Lite and Coors Light and a lot of the new seltzers we've been launching recently. So my role at Molson Coors is really taking the combination of our data, so collection of first-party data assets, making sure we can activate those through channels like programmatic, and then also making sure we can measure and understand them through marketing analytics, and then having the right consumer experience as our website management also sits under my remit.
Great. Well, we're lucky to have you. I'm going to pass it off now to Sean.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here. I'm Sean Buckley, COO at SpotX, which is now part of Magnite. For those not familiar, we build technology for media owners to manage their video advertising businesses, and I lead the commercial teams on our side.
And last but not least, Ash.
Yes, thanks, Andrew and Dave. Hi, this is Ash Gangwar. I lead our TV partnerships team at Trade Desk. For those of you guys who may not be familiar, Trade Desk is a buy-side platform. We buy advertising on a host of different channels. In my current role, I am focused on building our partnership with most of our larger networks. So happy to be here.
Thanks a lot. Great to see all these faces again. Looking forward to our discussion, and thanks for joining. So now we're going to kick off the Q&A part of our panel, and we're going to, as I framed up earlier, we're going to begin with some questions that really delve into how buyers are currently shifting to CTV. So along those lines, our first question is, how are buyers augmenting their TV buys to include CTV as well as programmatic? And let's start with Rachel.
Sure. Yeah. So we're kind of in an interesting situation because we're a hotel company. We're coming out of a big pandemic, and we haven't been really investing a lot in TV. So we're looking at the connected TV space as a way of really re-entering it as we're, rebuilding the market, rebuilding things. So we're really looking at as an opportunity to use data to get in front of the right people, and versus using TV for mass scale. So it's also an opportunity to enter smaller brands into the market that maybe didn't have larger TV budgets. So that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at the data-driven aspect of Connected.
That's great. That's very interesting when you talk about rebuilding with CTV. It seems like a perfect implementation. Nicole, I'd love to hear another brand perspective on that particular question and how you see the augmentation of TV buys for CTV and programmatic.
Yeah, I think we look at it more as a complement. It's really about what screen is the audience that we want to get in front of using. And so how do we use different planning tools or data to understand their preferences, and then, adjust our budget accordingly. So it's really about that total video planning solution and making sure we're getting in front of the right people so they can have the best experience when they're engaging with the entertainment that they want to, and then being relevant for them on that screen.
That's great. That's really great. And we'll talk more about data and targeting later, and we'll love to kind of dig into that a little bit more. But now I'll open it up to either Ash or Sean. If you want to chime in from your points of view, it would be great to hear a couple platform side opinions on the matter.
Yeah, I mean, in our discussions with buyers, I think it really varies. Like in some cases, folks are looking to replace the incremental reach from the traditional TV side, with OTT. And in that case, we actually, we try to provide a translation layer so that we're presenting connected TV or OTT in a way that they're familiar with. In other cases, folks are really leaning into the unique capabilities that OTT presents. And so, in those cases, we take a more ground up approach with an OTT centric view.
Yeah, I would almost support what Sean said. I think what we are seeing in the market are two types of buyers. One is sort of like the traditional linear teams that are being charged now to buy CTV, who are very focused on sort of that incremental buying that Sean mentioned. And then there is the sort of the programmatic or digital native buyers who are taking more of an approach of, and they want to buy CTV the same way they have been buying digital forever.
Yeah, I think you guys brought up a lot of fantastic points around the nature of CTV, but I think we can agree linear TV isn't necessarily going anywhere, but its role may be shifting. So I'd love to hear, Sean, since you sort of brought it up, what role is linear TV going to play in the future of programmatic?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was interesting, certainly over the last year, our primary focus as a company has certainly been the OTT space, but we've increasingly found applications for our technology in traditional television. So this is starting in areas like set-top box video on demand, right? We've started to see inventory get activated and get monetized programmatically there. And it's moving toward more advanced applications like live linear ad replacement through stuff like Project Or. And so I think there's an exciting future there. It's going to take some time. There are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of things to figure out. It's not going to happen overnight, but I definitely think it presents a really exciting opportunity for programmatic in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ash, being the platform where buyers are executing, do you see that sort of in a similar capacity as Sean pointed out?
Yeah, and sitting in the programmatic space, this may sound self-serving, but our belief is all TV will eventually be digital and all digital will be programmatic. Are we going to get there next year? Probably not. But it's definitely seeing an evolution. And in the phase one, which was sort of almost pre-COVID, was linear was separate, digital was separate, and they kind of lived their own silos. They had their own currency, their own data, separate buyers. What we've seen sort of like what I would define as phase two is a lot of times these two worlds are trying to merge together. So there is a lot of emphasis that we are seeing right now on cross-channel packaging. So linear and digital are being sold together. And even the networks are very happy to admit that as the ratings sort of seeing the decline, digital is the way that they can keep their collective reach where they need to be to sell these packages. I think we're going to see more of this for at least this year, maybe a little bit more into leading into next year. And then the phase three, which is where I said sort of everything would be digital and programmatic, that's where we start seeing linear look very much like digital, and it should behave the same way. I think common set of metrics, currencies emerge. The two buying teams on the linear and digital side start to blend together. And at that point, shouldn't be able to tell linear to digital separately. We're already seeing a lot of technology coming in that direction, which is taking linear and saying, hey, we're going to put a standard IAB VAST tag around the linear impression and make it look like digital. I think in next 2 years, we get there completely. And a lot of it, whatever the channel is, we call it CDV.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Rachel, Nicole, you guys are going to be the ones who would have to execute these buys. I mean, do you feel similar in the role that linear is going to play in programmatic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, we're having conversations right now, even with our agency, on who should buy CTV direct, who should buy it programmatically. We have a different kind of hybrid in-house programmatic model. So just trying to understand, as more choice comes apparent in the marketplace, what really are those best decisions and what are the pros and cons of each of those? I would assume, many people who are probably even listening to this webinar right now are facing right now, because there isn't a one size all fits approach for this.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a fantastic point. It is certainly complex.
And just out of curiosity, as a follow-up to that, is that the hybrid approach? That's a that great to sort of hear about that happening on the client side. Is that something when you're talking to your agency that you're also hoping that sort of they will be able to accommodate? Is that because it seems like it will all start at the client level, then it will flow, and I think a lot of the agencies are doing a great job of this already, and then ultimately the pipes have to be in place to accommodate. But is that something that is kind of trickling down to that agency level?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our situation, the buying side of programmatic sits outside of our agency, but we have the strategic conversations because we need to think about media holistically. So, our agencies need to be partners at the table with us. They're doing our big TV buys as well. And so as you guys were just talking, as it's all integrated, you can't sit in silos. You have to be a connected team in order to really make sure you get it right. And so that's how, we're all leaning in together to try and figure out the solution, as well as our programmatic partners. And, we're all at the table together having those conversations.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, Rachel, do you have anything you want to add, or should we go to the next question? I can kick the next question to you if you want.
Sure. Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. All right. So as we've discussed, there's a lot of change happening around video buying and advanced TV in general. And a huge part of this is about data, as we kind of touched on earlier. But this, like the usage of data is also rapidly changing. So the question is, with the shifting nature of audience targeting, how important does deterministic first-party data become, and why?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's super important. And, I can speak on behalf of IHG, and we have, a really robust first party data pool with our members. And so it's been super important and will continue to be really important for us as, we prepare and everybody else is preparing for the demise of the cookie and the importance of the first party. But not only is it just really important to, data and targeting and making sure we're talking to our audience in the right way, it's also important for privacy. When we have our conversations with legal and privacy, and having that deterministic match is helpful for consumers that may not want to be targeted. So being able to detach that data more easily, deterministically, is something that, at least the legal and privacy teams are looking for. When you're working on something that's more probabilistic, it's harder to decouple that and to give consumers the transparency and opt-in and opt-outs that they want. And then the last part that I think is really important is on the analytics front. I think that the first party data for brands will become important for analyzing performance as well, and making those connections when third party cookies are already less stable, and especially in this type of environment, that it will play a role for analytics as well.
That's great. It makes a ton of sense. Nicole, would you agree with those points, or anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, a couple extra, as being in a regulated category, deterministic data also helps, because we know that consumer is over the age of 21. So, that's one extra layer that I think is unique for us. The other piece I think on the analytics front that I wish we could do, but we don't have in our space, but I think Rachel probably has more of, is that ability to do true closed loop measurement and really get the attribution nailed. I think you do need that one-on-one information and knowing that it is the right person because it was deterministic, I think helps from that front. And then the last piece I would just add is the more you can actually confirm who that person is, even if you're not doing one-to-one marketing, the more likelihood, if you know things about that person, what their preferences are, you have a greater chance of getting the personalization right when you try to execute that type of strategy and really show a consumer that you know and care about them as an individual. And so that can, obviously help lead you down that path towards brand love a little bit faster.
Absolutely. Ash, Sean, anything to add there?
Just, being a company that builds technology for media owners, I mean, in the OTT space, I think there's a lot of really compelling value proposition from the supply side, and we're working closely with, our platform customers to help bring that data to bear so that it's usable from an advertising perspective, but also protected and used in a way that the whether it be a media owner or a device manufacturer are comfortable with. And there are some really interesting capabilities, especially as you move into things like programmatic guaranteed, where you want to do those refinements preemptively right before the ad requests are going out the door. I think there's real value there in terms of how publishers are enabling their data.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is I do think that there is a tons and tons of value in first-party deterministic data. I think where we are challenged as an industry is how we leverage this data. Like when I look at the data, at least from a programmatic ecosystem perspective, the first-party or publisher data is still logged in walled gardens with the publishers. The buyers have data, the sellers have data, but they don't talk to each other. And I think one of the biggest challenge that we have to solve as an industry is how do we blend those two data sets in a manner that is both privacy safe, as well as both sides feel comfortable that they are getting value from that data. I think there are solutions like Unified ID that are aiming to bridge that, but there are other half a dozen more that you can point out into the industry. I think a lot of what happens in the programmatic space in next 3 years will depend on how good we get as having a common translation currency so the buy and sell side can speak effectively.
Yeah, I want to. Oops, sorry. Go on, Ash.
Go ahead.
Well, this follow-up is coming to you anyway. So, I mean, you kind of brought up yourself, right? There are changes coming to the ecosystem, not just programmatically, but holistically with how we target. So in your mind, I mean, how much greater does the value of first-party data, especially if you look like, to your point, like a publisher like Slings or a buyer's first-party data, what's its value over the course of the next 3 years?
Yeah, so I would say this. If you look at the way sort of traditionally TV has bought and been sold, it's all been sold on context. Right now, the way a lot of times CTV is sold on audiences. And at least programmatically, it's sold as audiences. I think those two silos need to break down. It doesn't have to be either by audience or by context through the publisher. I think the maximum value comes if you can combine both of those together. So publishers, I mean, I'll be frank, publishers who are going to share most of their first-party data are going to get lion's share of spend going forward. And the publishers that are not so progressive and are more concerned about, hey, where is this data going to show, what is the value, and are more protective about it, I think we'll see spend continuing to shift away from them. Because it's just the nature of programmatic. We've seen this with digital, we've seen this with mobile. Data is the fuel that charges this ecosystem. And if you keep the data behind silos, you lose value.
I mean, going over to Sean, I mean, Sean, do you feel in a sense that the opportunity that's hitting the programmatic ecosystem is a way for it to sort of shift from a more walled garden to a more open approach, in line with what Ash said, where he feels that first-party data and those who are more open with it are going to see an advantage, and walled gardens are traditionally a more closed activation standpoint?
I think, you're going to, I think, especially some of the larger, media companies and players in the space, they're going to be measured in terms of how they bring their, and make their data available. So I don't think it's going to be some sort of wide open, hey, it's all you can eat, right? My data will be everywhere. I think they're going to be controlled in terms of how it's made available. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, it's an integral part of the value proposition for this ecosystem. So, making it available in an effective way is key for sure.
Rachel, Nicole, obviously you guys do a lot of buying with audiences. I mean, what is your approach to sort of the role data plays, especially first party data in the coming years?
Rachel,
yeah, I can go. So, I mean, again, I mean, let me think. The best way that, one of the ways that we're thinking about data is with our first party data is creating a higher share of voice, a higher frequency, a higher impact. If we really know who our audience is and who's going to be most likely to be in the market to travel, we want to look big in front of those consumers and be able to make an impact through the screen. So I think it all comes down to reach and frequency and making an impact. And so, making sure we have a really large addressable audience that we can do that with is going to continue to be important for us.
Yeah, I think it's also about understanding how it impacts your different objectives overall. So, we can use our first party data to make sure we're speaking to the people who are currently buying our products, to make sure we're speaking to them in the right way and at the right cadence that we need to for those types of objectives that we have. But we can also use the first party data we have to make sure we're using it to help find those next drinkers who are going to come into the fold. So I think there's a lot of different ways and there's a lot of versatility in how we're thinking about that first party data and making sure that we're using it to the best extent we can to unlock all the value. But I think one of the things Rachel is saying on reach and frequency is incredibly important. And, with the cookies going away, with scale issues, with some of these ID graphs, being able to still measure on those basic philosophies that we all know are true in media becomes really important. We're seeing challenges on getting to reach, and there's a lot in the industry on that as, some of these new opportunities come out, but also how you measure frequency. So, would love to see how we solve for those right now, because those seem to be kind of growing challenges that not everyone's talking about quite as openly, just because they're the basic principles that we all grew up on.
Great, thank you guys for the very smart answers. Now we're going to kind of look a little bit more forward. We have been talking about the future a little bit and needs, but we really want to dig into that topic and think about, what we're doing a lot of things right as an industry. There's some challenges, but like from your perspective, Rachel, what does the market as a whole need to improve on?
Well, improvements, I think I think Ash was talking about it earlier, and it's really like the content play, because in this space, we are so focused on audience, which is absolutely important, but the matching it with the content and knowing where you're going to be in the content is definitely a big challenge, because it is a TV screen, and so everybody thinks of it as traditional TV buying, which is very different, and it can be very content directed. You can, know your schedule, know where you're going to show up, and that's just not the case with programmatic connected TV space. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to be more transparent and be able to, act more like TV, but I think that's one of the opportunities, and just, some simplification and some consolidation would be nice too.
Yeah, on the Sling side of what we do, we are transparent. I think that's a core value that we share with that perspective, and I think that it's really important because quality matters, and we're going to dig into that a little bit later. But you need to have that assurance that you're running within a great environment that, as Nicole said, matches the audience that you're trying to reach and the particular behavioral patterns of that audience as well. So Nicole, with that being said, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that would be great if we could figure out, and Ash touched on earlier, is the currency piece. I'd like to be able to really apples to apples compare the different types of video options that we have and understand who is performing better, who is delivering on our KPIs. But that's a challenge today when we can't really have the same kind of measurement, let's say on YouTube versus how we're performing on CTV. If we could get to that place, I think, it would be a really interesting conversation to see what is really that optimal mix when we think about total video planning.
Yeah, Ash, anything to add there, or Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I can build a little bit on sort of that currency. And no panel is complete unless you talk about Nielsen in TV, right? So I'll try to stay away from it. But I think for so many years, people have used Nielsen or other demos as a currency because that was the only one available. I think as a market, we need to get past it and start thinking about what is the data that's available in this new ecosystem, and how do I adjust my KPIs based on what is available, and in most cases, it's better than what was available in the linear. So I think biggest value that we can add is make this shift from old demographic-based buying to more KPI-driven buying. And that KPI may be different for different brands. It may be different for different categories and industries, but we should all figure out what that KPI is and then use that as the common currency to measure across everything. Granted, Nicole, it's not going to happen tomorrow. There are challenges, and identity is one of the biggest ones that I think we need to solve before we can talk about like, hey, I want to use my own personal, my own first-party data to measure everything. But that's the shift I think this industry is begging for, is towards a more outcomes or KPI-driven world where we can buy better.
Absolutely. Sean, anything to add there?
Yeah, I certainly agree with what's been said, but from our side of the fence, maybe a different angle. We're really focused on the podded ad experience. And so in a world where you have audience-driven buying, contextual buying, traditional sort of transaction models, automated transaction models, how do you bring all that together in a way that honors sort of the necessary rules and preserves a high-quality user experience? It seems fairly straightforward and certainly annoying when you're a consumer, watching and experiencing a bad podded ad experience, but it's quite complicated to really architect it properly in the industry. So it's a big focus of ours.
Great, thank you guys.
I remember when I started at SpotX 6 years ago now, right? CTV was just starting off, and it's obviously grown a lot, both in quality and in terms of scale and in terms of buyer interest. But the fact remains, which Rachel pointed out, that there is still sometimes a large gap within transparency. And so I'm curious to hear your guys, where does the market still need to improve as it relates to transparency within the OTT ecosystem, considering how much of a lift it's gone from buyers? Ash, if you wouldn't mind kicking it off there.
When you refer to transparency, you mean the sort of the contextual signals that we see through it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be any number of things, right? I mean, I think right now there's not a standardization of what should be sent. And the fact is, we have publishers who send just their name. We have other publishers like Sling who want a past network and other parameters. So, the question comes up fairly often from buyers. And to be honest, to your point, I don't know if there is a way that it's been defined that works for everybody. So, sitting at the platform, you guys have the most conversations, I think, between buyers and publishers. And I think, you guys might have a unique understanding of what type of transparency does the market need to start to bring to buyers.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is definitely some basic information that right now is missing when we see impressions. And that, you would be surprised how many times even as basic information as network is not communicated when the supply comes our way. So I think the three sort of the bare basics are genre, network, and whether this is a live stream. I think if you can do those three basic ones, there's tons and tons of value. And the way I think about it is we need to start with parity with linear. So if a buyer is used to getting a report from linear that gives them information about network, genre, and maybe show, I think we start with that. We start with what everybody has always had, and then we take it from there and make it even more, enhance it from there.
And I really like that live versus non-live too, like understanding that, because there's value in both, and trying to understand as a buyer which environment you're in and what's working better.
And
Right.
Sean, I mean, I know Sean.
I completely agree with that. I mean, the live versus sort of on demand is huge. And by the way, the setup behind the scenes on that stuff, right? Purchasing, someone viewing on demand content versus purchasing against a live event with 400,000 concurrent viewers is an entirely different sort of back end setup and preparation process. So I think that's big. And certainly, as you mentioned, Andrew, it's come a long way, and I think standardization is key. There are also, though, some things that revolve around, hey, the transparency that you're looking for, maybe at show level or something like that, is not available because of the business relationship, right? Like the agreement between a programmer and a distributor. And there's also, in some cases, legal reasons why folks are hesitant to pass certain information. And so, I mean, there's complexity to it, but yeah, it's definitely vital.
I want to quickly ask a follow-up to you, Sean. We see a lot in the display world of SPO. That is a constant reference point. And in CTV, the ecosystem is not as fragmented yet, or we hope. So I'd love to understand from you, I mean, how important is it for OTT providers, DSPs, publishers, SPs to educate the buyers on sort of what that supply path actually looks like versus what they may be used to along other lines of businesses?
Yeah, it's like the biggest area of education, I would say, for us, right now, is the concept of how inventory splits and inventory rights work in OTT, the different cohorts of streaming services, whether you're talking about the device manufacturers, the virtual MVPDs, the programmers and broadcasters themselves, a high level understanding of, okay, this is how inventory splits work. This is who gets sort of what. This is a general idea of the volume of inventory share that goes here versus there. And also, as a next level to that, here's a high level understanding of like the type of capabilities that you can expect, whether it's going to be more of an audience driven sales proposition across a broad spectrum of programmers, or it's going to be more of a deep dive into more specific content targeting and that's available inside of one programmer's portfolio. Those inventory rights and where you buy have a big impact on the capabilities that are available. So that's a big part of the education that we're working on with the industry.
One thing that when we're thinking about education, one thing that we touched on this earlier, but when we're thinking about, staying on top of all of these new options out there, especially on your side of the business, Rachel and Nicole, when you're trying to keep tabs on all of the options, whether it's live or it's not, you just having a finger on the pulse for quality, as you mentioned earlier, seems to be a really important thing to have a handle on. How do you go about that? How do you account and plan for quality, and especially with all the new options that are out there seemingly every day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult because there are a lot of quality placements or apps out there, but they might not have scale. So how do you balance quality and scale? It is difficult, and everybody's viewing behavior is so personalized. I mean, we've done our own internal experiences, like within the walls of our like paid media team, and everybody uses a different device or uses different apps, and so there's no such thing as mass media consumption within the connected TV space, and it is this careful, delicate balance of scale and premium and stitching them all together. That is a new challenge.
That makes a lot of sense. Nicole, how about from your experience? Does that sound familiar to what you guys go through to figure out the quality question?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scale is a critical piece because unless you have a very large team, it's hard to sometimes look at every single new provider that's out there because they are growing so frequently. But I think the other side of it too is about just setting up a series of experiments of test and learns to understand, some of these platforms might be really quality and they might have a higher premium price point, but you might get a stronger return out of it. And I'm okay paying a higher CPM if I can actually get a higher delivery on my KPI. So by doing some, smaller experiments, sometimes you can test into that without having to too heavily invest and get the answer you need at a faster time period also.
That makes a lot of sense. Ash, anything to add there?
Sorry, do you mind asking that question again? I kind of lost track.
It's really about quality and balancing quality with scale was brought up by Nicole and Rachel. And, I think that on your side of the business, there's, I think that is part of the pitch, right? That scale is derived from, using the programmatic pipes. So I guess my question for you more specifically would be, like, how do you guide when you're working with a brand, like the two represented here? How do you go about giving them advice on how to sort through quality to make sure that they're in the right environments for their campaigns?
Yeah. Let me start by saying, I think one thing that we have done in CTV space that probably we did a terrible job when it was in digital. I think because the supply pool is limited, we've done a much better job of curating the right kind of inventory. Not saying that we have done this perfectly, but I think we've done this in CTV much better than we have done it in any other channel. So when we are talking about to a buyer, we ask them to make a balance between scale and quality in terms of how they split their budgets between private marketplaces and open market. Start with the private marketplaces, start with the deals that you have done directly. And if you are missing scale, then start mixing the open market on top of it, just for reaching the people that you haven't reached through your private marketplace deals. I think that has solved a lot of sort of anxiety that comes from, hey, I don't know where I'm buying, because if you're 80 to 90% of your budget is going in private marketplaces, you know what you're buying. And I think that's the sort of the good thing about CTV that we don't see in other places. Of course, tools like brand safety, fraud detection, they've become pretty standard. Like there is a basic level of filtering in any programmatic DSP. So we always layer that and start with it, and then you build on top of it.
Great. I believe we're pretty much out of time. I see that we're losing our rights here. So I want to make sure, do we have time for one more question? I think we have 4 more minutes. Andrew, I'll let you ask the final question.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think just to wrap it up, this is probably the year of OTT, similar to the year of viewability or the year of mobile that lasted 5 years. We are in the beginning of the second year of the year of OTT, and there's a lot to look forward to. I'd love quickly, 3 sentences or less to go around and just hear what you guys think is the future of OTT and what the actual, where does the OTT market go from here? Incredibly narrow question to answer in 2 sentences. Nicole, you unmuted, so I'm going to go with you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it continues to grow as it gains scales, it gains the identity connection points. So I think it's only up really from here.
Rachel?
Mine is more of a selfish one, like from a buyer perspective. Consolidation and simplification is where I'm hoping things go.
Makes sense to me. Ash?
I think we've done a really good job of sort of working in sort of this scatter or spot market. I think where we go from here is to crack how do we do this in forward-looking market. Because of scarcity of inventory, I think we need to figure that out quickly.
Last but not least, Sean.
Yeah, I guess to go on the consolidation model, a good week to talk about that, given some of the activity. But